All right, good evening there, fellow ProtectRs. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. I'm Greg LeBoff, got Coach Dustin Dodore, Brad Vandelay here with me. Tonight's going to be a really fun one. I really want to break something down for people. We're going to kind of, I titled this the tactical trio, the art of mass attack, and I mean really one of the most famous books out there is called The Art of War. And the graphic I did up for this was crossing out war and putting mass attack, because I specifically want to talk about tactical maneuvers, of which there are three primary tactical maneuvers. Now, these tactical maneuvers, you're going to find them in the military, in military strategies. Andrew the Great used them. I mean, you can just go back thousands of years and you're going to find representations of what is called the tactical trio. So military uses them, law enforcement uses them, and of course we use them as civilians wanting to understand and master the tool of violence. It is important that we are thinking and training strategically, but of course bad guys also use them. And one of the things that I find interesting about this discussion tonight is that whenever we do talk about the study of criminality and talk about violent predatory criminals, there's two kinds of ways to look at this, what I call organized and unorganized. And organized obviously means what it sounds like. They're more professional. They're higher educated. It's like they're very, very skilled. You know, send a really good criminal to prison, he comes out an even better criminal. They study, criminals study. They study human anatomy. They study injury to the human body. I mean, they study military and strategic tactics and thinking, and they're very well educated, right? It is their profession. And then you have the unorganized, which is almost like they're a little more instinctual or intuitive, and doesn't mean, in some ways you could argue that they're slightly less dangerous, but someone that's learned through experience, through trial and error, is equally as experienced. You know what I mean? Because it's like that street smarts. They figured this shit out. So when we talk about the tactical trio and we talk about the art of mass attack, I actually want to share these concepts from the vantage point or from the viewpoint of the criminal, not of the good guy necessarily, not how we use them, not how military or law enforcement uses them, but I want to look at it through the lens of the bad guy. So the art of mass attack, right? From that standpoint, we're going to discuss the tactical trio. So I really hope you stick with me tonight, because I'll tell you something. Maybe I'll say this right. All maneuvers, tactical maneuvers, whether they're executed by good guys or bad guys, remember that the tool of violence works for both the same. Whether it's self-defense or murder is determined after. So all tactical maneuvers occur in space and in time. And you have to understand what the two major underpinnings are of that. So all tactical maneuvers happen in both space and time, and there are two underpinning objectives from each of those. And I'm telling you, if you don't understand the tactical trio, and you find yourself facing, mass attack by violent predatory criminals, if you don't understand these three different types of maneuvers, you are at a significant fucking disadvantage. So tonight we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit. We're going to unveil this, and I'm going to share this with you. So it's going to be a really good one tonight. So sit back, relax, back in a few seconds, and we'll dive into this. Every day I hear more stories of good people being brutally assaulted and murdered by some individual who has a repeat history of violent offenses, drug addiction, and mental health issues, who is free to walk the streets in the same city where I live. That threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to protect his life, his family, and his property. I'm Greg LeBoff. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay, so we're back. So we're talking about the tactical trio tonight, the art of mass attack. I said that there's three tactical maneuvers that date back thousands of years. They are utilized by military, law enforcement, as well as civilian, good guys and bad guys. And so we're going to break these down. Now, I also said before we cut to the intro that All tactical maneuvers occur in both time and space. Okay, they occur in time and space. And so understand that there's two major underpinnings here, right? Tactical maneuvers that occur, the objective if they occur over space is to gain and maintain control over key kind of environmental terrain. Okay, so as assaults occur over space, it is a battle over key terrain. Okay, so that's the first part of this. The second part, the goal of these assaults and these maneuvers occurring over time is to create and exploit opportunities within that. So if we just stand back, we say, okay, listen, these bad guys, right? They are going. I mean, the three maneuvers or the three, kind of maneuveral strategies that I'm going to share with you. They are trying to gain control over space. Okay, so environment, key terrain, and then within that, they're going to try to create opportunities that they can then exploit. Okay, so let's dive into the very first maneuver, and the first maneuver is called the hammer and the anvil. Okay, so what I want you to think of when it comes to the hammer and the anvil is that you have two forces. And of course, one is going to be the hammer and one is going to be the anvil. So imagine if I'm out and I have these predators and they see me. I'll give you a couple different ways that they could execute this maneuver. But one would be that let's say there's three of them, just to give you a clearer picture. Two out of the three position themselves behind me. They position themselves and take away an egress path that I might have, meaning a means to escape or a means to withdraw. But they plant themselves there. They're not necessarily in range to strike. They are there as the anvil, meaning I cannot retreat. So they are blocking a path of escape. Where the other person who becomes the hammer is moving towards me. And so what you get is you create this dilemma. You create this really dynamic problem. Now, this is different than if all of a sudden the two bad guys behind me are right on me and the guy in front of me is right on me. That's a different maneuver. Those are different strategies and tactics. So this one is that 2, 3, 4. I mean, it can vary in numbers. Obviously, it could even be one guy, but he blocks an egress path. Where he's the anvil, where the other attacker is approaching me, whether he's blitzing me or whether he's verbally pontificating and bridging in using his words, but he's moving towards me. Now imagine yourself in this situation, and you can again you see, hear, or feel the threat, so you understand that there's a threat. But all of a sudden, this problem of like you're looking at what would be the easiest path of resistance for you to get the fuck out of there. And yet you see this ominous looking person who's standing there who quite clearly you go, oh fuck, there's the threat. But at the same time that you're recognizing that your path of least resistance to get the fuck out of there is blocked by this brooding, ominous fucking figure, you at the same time have the threat in front of you progressing in on you, like closing in. The pressure is fucking building. So now all of a sudden you can feel this hammer and this anvil type of concept. Okay, and remember that there's 5 different elements that predatory criminals want to bring to bear on somebody. Now, sometimes they can get all 5 ingredients into this, and sometimes they can only get a few of them. But the first 2 of those 5 ingredients is they want to try to overwhelm and overpower. Now, that doesn't always mean physically. Sometimes what that means is they want to overwhelm and overpower your sensory faculties, and they want to overload your central nervous system. They want to overload and overwhelm and overpower your cognitive thought process, your problem solving, your reasoning, all of these different things. So hopefully what you can understand is that when you have bad guys that are familiar with the hammer and the anvil type maneuver strategy, they are going to overwhelm that system, or they're going to tax it. And if you don't understand what they're fucking doing, then you are more susceptible to becoming overwhelmed. Now, I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll let you guys kind of throw your 2 cents downrange if you want on this. But the other thing is, I know this is about the art of mass attack and teaching people the tactical trio, of maneuvers, but understand that really educated or seasoned predatory criminals can do this on their own. Because I said that all maneuvers, all tactical maneuvers, occur both over space and time. And the space aspect of it is controlling, gaining, maintaining control over key terrain. Well, if bad guys are looking for the right moment in time, they are waiting to begin their assault, and they wait until there is an environmental barrier. They wait till I'm in a corner or I'm blocked by something, then the terrain itself can become the anvil. And then that person, as he moves in, he still accomplishes the hammer and the anvil type scenario, and he does it all by himself. This could be done in confined quarters, in little entrance ways where ATM machines are. This could be done in elevators. This could be done in hallways with locked doors. This can be done in a lot of different ways. And if you really think about this, active shooters that go into these schools often lock doors. They bring chains with them. They barricade things. Why? Because they can create a hammer anvil type situation where they can create a kill box, and it makes it more efficient and easier for them to relay destruction. So the first concept I wanted to share is the hammer and the anvil. And I'll let you guys, if you guys want to jump in on this a little bit, just any part of what I've said so far, if you want to share something, please do.
Yeah, I think for me, as you're talking, even just describing that one example of a hammer and an anvil, as you sit here and you kind of just image this picture as you paint it, and just sitting here listening to it, I can already feel like how those situations can very much have that pressure cooker sensation. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think if you
Yeah.
truly image it, you're like, oh yeah, I could see if you just stood there and let it happen and you did nothing, how quickly that pressure would increase. And so right away it just hit me with a few things, like just how important it is to regulate. We talk about that all the time. Is like, it's sort of a situation like that. Self-regulating is massive, and I mean that's a whole podcast in itself. Understanding the environment was the second thing that like really hit me. You're talking about with them, their ability to control the space. Well, obviously, on our side, the better you understand an environment and how to recognize what in that environment is your friend and what's your foe, and how you can use that strategically to your benefit, massive.
Yeah.
And then the other one is just understanding event horizons. People who don't know that terminology, it's just the timeline of events. How easy and how well can you recognize what's happening in the moment as scene one, and then your ability to predictably, be able to say, oh, scene two is probably this, scene three is this, four, five, six, seven, and then how can I intervene and prevent that timeline from unfolding the way that violent criminal expects, right?
100%. Yeah, great points. Brad.
Yeah, you said at the very beginning, the study of criminality, and this is a way of thinking for people with bad intent. And yes, it works both ways. Like, you understand the landscape of violence, you could negate a lot of the things, but like when you think about the situation that we're describing with the hammer and anvils, like this is not by accident, right? This is something that they are bad criminals with bad intentions. They're not just happenstance creating this type of environment where they could use the terrain, use time, and use space to the detriment of their victim. This is things that they're studying. Like you said, you go to jail, you come out a better criminal because you're learning from other people that have done all these things. This is a learned behavior. This is things that they do with intent, and we as good law-abiding citizens, like, we need to understand this way of thinking. We always have to constantly study criminality to know, where the where the opportunities that they're trying to capitalize on. My head, and I know this is probably going to go for all of them, but I went immediately to fight the objective, not the man. Because we think about this situation and I say, what do they want? You describe the hammer and anvil. Well, they want to put a squeeze on you. They want to get you in between that anvil so they could lay the hammer on you, right? So obviously, I know that we're probably not getting into the tactical circumventing of what they're doing, but you got to know what's out there. You have to have that on your radar, because again, you can't be like, oh, whoa, what are these guys doing here? Dustin said, is like, You got to be aware of your environment. You got to be aware of your surroundings, event horizon, all those things. But this is again my 2 cents. It's a learned intent behavior. It's not. They're not doing this by accident.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, again, great points. And you guys are right. Everything you said, 100% agree with, and that's why we are doing this and talking this in the podcast. And just to kind of reframe, like one of the things with the hammer and the anvil is to create a can't flee, can't stay dichotomy, right? And right now, if you can imagine, you're with your kids, you're with your wife, and all of a sudden an attack starts to unfold, and most people right away they think of the attack only in terms of like, oh, what are they doing? Are they trying to punch me? Are they trying to grapple me? Do they, you know what I mean? Like they just start thinking tools and techniques when it's like, and again, what we're introducing people is to a tactical education. And that involves the study of criminality, as both you guys mentioned. And so, again, it's problems, not solutions. This entire podcast, you're right, Brad, we're not going to venture down the alley of solutions. We are going to simply present the problems. And it's not that the solutions aren't important, they obviously are, but you have to own the problem. You can't just have a general intellectual understanding and acknowledgement of going, oh, I understand what you're saying. Do you? Like, do you really understand what we're talking about here? Like, you know what I mean? It is very important to go very deep and really, really educate yourself, not just understand. Understanding doesn't equate to functionalism, right? It's like saying knowledge is power. No, actionable knowledge is power. The accumulation of knowledge is like about as valuable as owning a set of encyclopedias nowadays. It's not very valuable. I mean, I can find information by just Google searching. I don't have to memorize shit. I don't have to retain stuff. I can just if I can Google search, I can get access to any information anywhere. It's the implementation of that information. It's the usability, the functionality that makes it important. So just understanding and being able to say, oh yeah, there's a tactical trio, and there's a hammer and the anvil, and blah blah blah. That's not enough. You got to really actually study this stuff like a chess master would. So that can't flee, can't stay dichotomy is very, very overwhelming. So that is the first of the tactical trios, the hammer and the anvil. And now I'm just going to jump to the second one because I want to make sure that we have enough time to go through all three of these, and then there's another thing I want to add at the end. But the next strategy is called envelopment, and envelopment is differs in the fact that in envelopment, what you have is you have two different forces. Now you had the hammer and you had the anvil, but the anvil, the guys that played the role of the anvil are much more about containment than they are about the act of attacking. Right, so the anvil is about containment, saying we're not going to let you flee, we're going to block and we're going to barricade and we're going to contain, and then the hammer comes in and the hammer does the work. Now, just for clarity, you could have one or two people playing the anvil, and you could have 2, 3, or 4 people that are the hammer. So it doesn't have to always be that there's 5, 6 people that are playing the anvil and only one playing the hammer. No, it could be one person that is the anvil and 2 that are the hammer. But the dynamic is the anvil is about containment, and then the force in motion is the hammer. Now, in the envelopment strategy, is you actually have, this is far more cunning and deceptive, because what you start getting into now is the world of flank attacks, right? So hammer anvil, the anvil's behind, the hammer's coming in often fairly front, okay? Once you get into the envelopment, you have 2 forces. So one is more stationary and one is in motion. And so what happens is the front, more stationary individual distracts, right? In law enforcement, they call these often a knock and notice. So they'll go up to the front door. Police officer knocks on the front door to draw the attention. Police, I have a warrant, or police, I have a summons. Open the door, and while everybody's focused on the front of the door, the SWAT or the warrant officers are actually maneuvering around the back. So now they are coming from the flank attack. So the envelopment is one front is the distraction, is the fixed force, and then the mobile force is coming to flank attack. Now, I think without even having to paint the picture, the second I just described what an envelopment maneuver is, everybody probably got this. You come out of the store and somebody walks up, hey buddy, you got a smoke? You know, oh, I'm sorry, I don't smoke. I didn't ask if you smoked, I asked if you fucking had a smoke. But they're talking to you. They're creating, might even just be low level conflict, but something to draw your attention and get you a little more tunnel visioned, so that the bad guys can come in from behind, right? So that they can catch you on the blind side. They can flank attack you. So that becomes the envelopment strategy. Now, one of the things I guess for you guys is the questions I would have, because I know that through each of these you're gonna have the same general feelings as you did at the first one. But when you think about this, and you think about what maybe you could add to this, is we have through scenarios, we have through training, we have experience, like we have experienced a lot of these types of different maneuvers. And so you can think back, I'm sure, to many different times where you had examples of people that maybe were doing this with more organized intent, and then people sometimes that were more opportunistic and more unorganized. But what is the general feeling that you experienced or that you know to be true about these types of situations? And one last thing I'll kind of add to this is often the hammer and anvil type maneuver often requires superior force, like a real show of force, meaning that you either really need somebody that fits the role of that big ominous threat that nobody intuitively wants to move towards, especially if it's a single person, because that anvil is about containment. So there has to be the visceral lack of desire to want to move that way, right? Because that's the real anvil. That's that traditional. So you either need 2-3 guys or one massive guy, but typically you got to have 2-3 guys or something really big and ominous, which requires numbers, it requires force, it requires size. And then you typically also, as the hammer, need to have a certain amount of threat there. So that tends to require a little bit more attributes or more specific things. Whereas when you start talking about an envelopment strategy, the first thing you guys were, and I'll just end it on this and let you guys go, but the level of cunning and the willingness to cheat goes to a different level. Right. So I don't know if you guys want to add a few things in on envelopment, then
Just on the perspective of the bad guy, um, when I think of the two maneuvers that we talked about, I really think for me they're creating opportunity more so with this one in terms of like that distraction, right? Um, where they're trying to like distract and create that opportunity so someone can come out from the side and flank and do damage that way. You have two forces now that are willing to engage that way, but yeah, it's a little bit more insidious from the bad guys. Not like the hammer and anvil isn't as well, but just you can see how they're creating and pushing an opportunity, right?
yeah.
As opposed to just on that physical plane, right? I think there's a lot more that is going to come into that whole overall big picture on how they create that opportunity. Like you said, you got to smoke. They start engaging like in a lot of different ways, and it's not like there's no backstory with the first one, but very much so using using some other skill sets to create that opportunity for them to capitalize on for sure.
Yeah. And I'll just throw this out there before you jump in, Dustin, but the root concept of the envelopment maneuver is to apply strength to a weakness, right? That's the root concept, apply strength to weakness. Where, like I said, the hammer and the anvil is almost like overwhelming show of force. Whereas the envelopment maneuver is applying strength to weakness. Dustin, if you want to throw something in.
Yeah, I mean, you said it when you said like this one, how it starts to play into just how much cunningness comes out like on the violent criminals side of this one. And yeah, I think the distraction side of this strategy for them is just so dangerous because I guess the moral of the story is, well, don't get sucked into the story, essentially. And then I think that's why this works so well for them, is because so many people who are good people can very easily get sucked into a story. They can get sucked into that distraction. And it makes people very vulnerable because when they allow themselves to get sucked in and they shut the awareness off of whatever else is happening, then they kind of miss the whole strategy. So So yeah, I think that's what it is. It's like you can't get sucked into a story. You have
Yeah.
to always stay in condition gray and just be ready to, or sorry, condition yellow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's it for me
Yeah.
on that.
Well, I think too with this is, we always get guys that talk like this. They say, okay, like if you have a group, if you're ever facing a group of guys, take the guy out with the biggest mouth first. Take the guy who's talking, doing the most talk, take him out first, right? And I'm not saying that can't at times be correct, but that's very checkers thinking. That's very antisocial aggression. Like you ran into 3 or 4 drunk frat boys that are looking for a fight, and most times the guy that's got the biggest mouth is the guy that you take him out first, and everybody else loses a lot of interest. But you got to remember, we're playing a different game. We're playing chess, not checkers. We're talking about organized, violent predatory criminals with a significant history of successful violent assaults. And so what I'm getting at is that oftentimes when these criminals employ an envelopment type maneuver, their main force is the surprise force. They are the flank attack force, meaning that the guy standing in front of you is most likely the new guy. He's the guy that is the least dangerous out of all of them, because what he's doing is his whole role is to just distract. So he is not typically the most efficient killer. He's not the one with the most experience. So I thought this was just a good opportunity, because the power of investing in what we're talking about and having trained what we're talking about and studied strategic and tactical maneuvers and thinking is that if I'm in a situation where somebody comes up, the guy that's doing the most talking sets off a red flag in me. And not only do, like you were saying, Dustin, not only do I not want to get caught up in his story, but I want to properly prioritize the threat that he is, because their main force is probably coming up behind me. They're about to exploit the flank attack. They're about to take their strength to my weakness. And I really love how they do that, because I don't care how big the man is, how strong the man is, how tough the man is, how experienced the man is. We all have weaknesses. And for most of us that I know, we don't have eyes in the back of our head, right? So if somebody is able to blindside us, if they are actually able to maneuver and flank attack us, that is a vulnerability with us. We are weak at that point. And so these violent predatory criminals aren't looking for a head-to-head straight-up fight. They're not threat assessing you and going, look, I can see this guy is strongest in these ways. That's where I want to fight him, because, to be the best, you got to fight the best. I know lots of fighters that say that. I read an article this morning about Roy Jones Jr. saying that the problem with boxing today is that nobody wants to fucking fight anybody that's any good, because everybody's terrified of getting a loss. And he's like, the reality is that it's combat. Anyone can put together 1 or 2 punches that could take anybody down. But he's like, back in my day, you weren't worried about your win-loss record. What you were obsessed with was fighting the very best in the world and beating them. So it wasn't about getting the win. Someone could say, I've got 80 wins and no losses. But it was like, who the fuck have you fought? And he's like, and it's not exciting for people nowadays to watch the sport of boxing, because nobody that's good wants to really fight anybody that's good. And I'm like, yeah, it's very interesting points and observations, and I think he's right. So, in violence, though, again, these guys aren't looking, to be the best, so fight the best. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that guy's a legitimate black belt. I want to beat him on the ground, because otherwise I'll never be taken seriously as a fighter. These guys don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? So I thought it's a really good point in an envelopment strategy. If you recognize this maneuver happening, understand that their primary force, the most dangerous part of them, is coming from behind. So if you get stuck in the story and you start thinking about, I better take out the mouthpiece standing in front of me and the rest of them will run scared. Not in this strategy, you won't. That guy is cannon fodder. He's done exactly what matter of fact, if he gets you to engage on him, you're really distracted. You're really focused and locked in on him. You're just allowing the flank attack to be infinitely more successful. So just another little point that I think is worth mentioning for sure.
Well, it's
yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
It's exactly what happened many, 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 many years and moons ago for me on White Ave. walking down the street with my friend and his girlfriend. Some little scrawny, small little guy starts talking trash. I may have been under the influence a tiny little bit back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
and I might have said a few things back. And this guy gets up and comes in, blah blah blah. The only thing is, they didn't try to flank me from behind me. They tried to flank me from behind him, and the whole parking lot behind this guy come walking towards as well. I'm like, okay, this is not anything I want to be involved in, and it quickly made an egress. But that's exactly what they were trying to do. If they were more insidious, they would have changed where they were coming from.
Yeah, they would have actually got you at the flank instead of front.
Because I was able to see exactly
Yeah.
what was behind the cannon fodder, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, all the verbal discourse.
And that was an accident. They were out there. That was what they were specifically doing that night.
Yeah,
for
100%,
sure.
Yeah. Now, before we move on to the third one, so the first was the hammer and the anvil. The second is the envelopment maneuver. Before I move to the third one, let's just really quickly talk about the complexities of establishing each of these maneuvers. So, we said that with the hammer and anvil maneuver for bad guys, you need a certain amount of overwhelming force, right? So you either need the numbers, you need the equipment, meaning you got a couple guys, but they're holding bats or machetes, or you got large, ominous-looking, intimidating people. So, it's not hard to set up a hammer and anvil, but you do require certain elements or attributes, let's say, to make it effective. Okay, but it's not hard to set up, and it's really not hard to stay organized in that type of maneuver. Now, the second you go to the envelopment maneuver, where now you say, okay, well, we got the fixated front force, which is the distraction. Well, that's pretty easy to establish. But now the secondary or the main force, the flanking force, they have to. There's a certain amount. They have to strike within the lifetime of that opportunity of distraction, right? So it takes a little bit of coordination to make that happen, but again, not too hard. But it takes a little bit of organization, I would say. So there's a little bit of a complexity level to it. I think that becomes nullified with experience. So I would think you would see this with much more experienced predators. Now, the third one is called a pincer. And a pincer is, some people actually refer to the pincer maneuver as a double envelopment maneuver. So it is a very close, let's say it's very closely related to the envelopment strategy. The primary difference is this. There is still one front fixated force, but instead of one, the primary force flank attacking, there are two elements in motion. So there are two subsidiary forces that are now blitzing the attack. Okay, so one of the first things that I'd mention with the pincer is that the pincer is quicker to set up, right? Because if you have a series of 4 or 5 bad guys, and you have one guy that is just designed to be like, okay, your whole fucking job is just initiate the fuckers. You're the focal point. So this person hits him with the focal point. Well, the other remaining 4 guys, let's say, they just can't stand together. So if you just got 2 on this side and 2 on the other side, or 3 on this side, 1 on this side, so long as they're separated and on opposite sides of each other, what happens is the second the target becomes fixated, these 2 elements fucking they flank attack. So you could probably see that it takes less organization and you could set it up in a more rapid manner, because if we go back to just the envelopment strategy, and Dustin, you're the focal point, so you're the fixated force, so you get me talking. And Brad comes at me, I don't care if it's right side, left side, or from straight behind, but Brad runs to a flank attack, but I even just see a glimmer of it, and I see Brad coming, I have better opportunity to jackrabbit. Like to get the fuck out of there, because now Brad's chasing and he's a single force. Now, the fixated person might join the pursuit, but you get what I mean. There's more avenues of escape for the rabbit when there's only one dog coming after him. But with the pincer maneuver, I'm fixated, but all of a sudden, and typically you can imagine, each of the other forces are coming on either side of me, there's a lot less opportunities. So now you start seeing that concept of like can't stay, can't go, where you're like, you go to turn one way and you're like, oh fuck. And then also you go to turn the other way, or you don't even recognize it until the first hit has happened. And then all of a sudden you cover to your left, and all of a sudden you're sustaining damage to the right. So it is clearly the pincer maneuver, very, very overwhelming. And you can look back, and the pincer maneuver has an extensive and very successful history over the last 3,000 years in military maneuvers, and you can probably start to understand why. So that kind of brings us to like the third one and the final one is that kind of pincer maneuver. And I will say though that one of the downsides, and I don't want to get into solutions here, but it's worth noting that if you're running, let's say, if they run a pincer maneuver on you, so somebody fixates you, and now you've got dual forces flank attacking you from opposite sides, what can happen is it can start to become more chaotic. They can have a harder time communicating with each other. If Dustin fixates me and Brad flank attacks me and ambushes me, Brad doesn't have to communicate with anybody. Dustin's doing exactly what he should fucking do. I'm looking at him. He's keeping my attention drawn. The more antics he can put up, the deeper he draws my attention, the better it is. But Brad is Brad. Brad just moves, attacks, destroys, does what he does. But if all of a sudden there's, Brad and somebody else on the other side, they can get wires crossed. Especially if you turn around and start going, well, there's 2 or 3 on this side, 3 or 4 on that side. Believe it or not, like, the gun targeting, like, they can actually cross wires and get into each other's way. Especially under that blood rush and all that type of stuff, which could leave small holes for the rabbit to get out. So, again, like it's even though you're probably listening to this and understanding and thinking, holy fuck, like, are these guys really that organized? And geez, what would you do if they're that organized? You're kind of fucked. There's always margin for error, right? And again, we go back to maneuvers occur in both space and time. And space is to take control of key terrain, to gain and maintain control of key terrain. Well, what if, and this again is kind of bridging to solutions, Dustin, you guys, both you and Brad talked at the beginning, what if they can't maintain the terrain? What if I can take back some control over the terrain? So again, in the pincer maneuver, you might see where if we were going to start talking about solutions, I could use the fact that there's multiple forces in motion. I may be able to take back control over some of the space and time by exploiting weaknesses within what they are doing. But I could only do that if I understand their maneuvers, if I understand tactics. Right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I don't know if you
totally.
guys want to throw something downrange on the pincer maneuver.
For me, just very simple. It just the pincer to me, it just has that feeling of just swarming. It's the hornet's nest. And like you talked about how that potentially can become very chaotic feeling, and chaotic for everybody. Obviously chaotic for the intended victim, but as you said, it can also become somewhat chaotic for the violent criminals as well, because it is a little harder for them to organize and communicate. And I think, again, without going into solutions, and you kind of alluded to it, it's like there are things you can do when you understand the environment and you understand time and space, where in a way you can actually add to the chaos and yet still be the one to find the calm. And we always say, like, whoever can find the calm in the chaos is the one who's going to come out the winner. That's the one who's going to survive. And I think that's it, is you need to find the calm in the chaos of that swarm sort of feeling in the pincer maneuver.
Sorry, I'm laughing because the next thing that I want to share with you is actually called the swarm tactic, and it's not part of the maneuvers. So you're jumping ahead a little bit, but the pincer is not a swarm. A swarm is a swarm, and I'm going to get it to in a second. But you're not wrong. But I'm going to explain the difference so that everybody understands the difference in a second. So good choice of words, because you're not wrong, but they are different, and I will clearly define them. But anyway, the second you said swarm, it's kind of like swarm, I started laughing. So anyways, Brad.
You know what? I think my point that I want to make will be better suited. because I'm kind of thinking of something that's with all three of these and
Okay.
the big picture side of things. So I think we should just move to what
Okay.
Dustin brought
What
us into the
Dustin set up
swarm.
for you, just he
Intro.
transitioned us
I've
already.
introed it, so go ahead,
So
please.
go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And actually, it's a really good. It was a really good setup because there's the tactical trio which we've done: the hammer and the anvil, the enveloping, and the pincer maneuver. Those are the three maneuvers. The fourth, not. It is kind of like a maneuver, but it's not one of the three, and it is called swarming. And it is exactly as Dustin was starting to explain it, and it literally is taken again from studying insects and how like bees and ants and stuff, they will literally fucking swarm. Why it's not part of the tactical trio is because here's where it differs. All of the three maneuvers that we're sharing with you are done by a coordinated unit. Basically meaning that we're talking about strategic predatory criminals who are operating as one. They're operating as a collective. So a pincer maneuver, although now you have the most moving parts, one fixates you. Two moving flank attacking units that are operating collectively. That's what's insidious about this. That's what's so fucking dangerous about this. This is where people are like, you're stop training for a fucking bar fight. You know what I mean? Like if you're still training street fighting concepts, like you just understand you're playing in a completely different stadium and you're playing a different game, right? You're talking about violent predatory criminals. We're talking about a tier 1 type situation here. So these guys are operating as a collective. Now, the swarming concept, why it is still very important to understand is if you have bad guys that implement a swarm maneuver, they are operating semi-autonomously, right? So you're now starting, in my mind, I picture that as you're starting to get into more of the unorganized. So you can have a group of some really bad people. Like, I mean, you look at these guys individually, and these guys are not good people, and they have a very colorful history of repeat violence. I mean, these are people that have done extreme damage, but they are not operating collectively. They are semi-autonomous. They're together, and then they're opportunistic. And so all of a sudden, something happens, kind of like Brad, what you talked about. All of a sudden, there's a point of conflict. It escalates, and you got 5 guys, 3 guys, 13 guys, 30 guys, and they fucking swarm. From every angle, they just swarm you. And we see a lot of this. I was just doing one of our bad guy blueprint lectures the other day for a new student, and I was showing him the LRT subway attack where the guy's walking home. Like, you know, he's off work. He works for the LRT system, and he's walking through the tunnel, and literally it starts out three men swarm him, and then all of a sudden 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 people come in from all, and they just swarm him from all different angles, and they're kicking him and stomping him and smashing him, and somebody's grabbing his briefcase and grabbing this and grabbing that, and then they just fucking, as fast as they can, they just swarm out of there. And so you could literally see them operating semi-autonomously. So is that dangerous? Fuck yeah, it's dangerous. Is that a challenging tactical problem to solve? Fuck yes, it is. But I'll tell you what, as challenging and terrifying as that is, it is infinitely easier than if you run into predatory criminals who are operating as a collective and put you in a hammer anvil, put you in an envelopment, or put you into a fucking pincer maneuver. And that's what I want people to think about. That's why this is such an important topic, and that is why one of our saying, there's no such thing as tough anymore. It's trained or untrained. You either have the training or you don't have the training. You either have a tactical mindset, you're a strategist, or you're not. And the difference is training. Nobody's born that way. You've either been taught or you haven't. You don't know what you don't know until you know, right? So does that make sense, Dustin? Where, like, again, the pincer maneuver is the pincer maneuver. The swarm is the swarm, and that's why we separate them. Okay, so. Anyways, Dustin or Brad, now if you want, you can throw in one of yours, and because that was my goal today. And I don't want to get into solutions on this podcast, this episode. I want to leave people thinking about these maneuvers and running these, run these scenarios in your mind. And come up with different variations. Study criminality. Go look at some different, CCTV footage of assaults and murders that have already happened. Watch the tape and see if you can recognize these three different maneuvers when you witness mass attack type assaults.
Yeah, I think a few things for me. We're really trying to hammer home the study criminality. Because if you don't understand, again, if you don't own the problem, if you don't intimately know the problem, there's no solution for the problem if you don't, right? And it just like, sorry, Dustin, I'm going to try to throw an analogy out there. But again, we've said this before. It's something that we've talked about. It is like violence is no different than magic. When you see behind the curtain and you understand the interworkings of what violence is, it loses some of its luster. You know what I mean? It doesn't make it any less dangerous, 100%. Not saying that. But this is, again, there's so many different elements to violence, but that magic trick, that magic show, just like these maneuvers, when you understand that these are part of the bad guy blueprint, some of the maneuvers that they're going to do, and it's on your radar, you've seen behind the magic, or you've seen behind the curtain because you've studied criminality. Doesn't make them any less dangerous. I'm not saying that, but it makes them more understandable, less to be taken completely and utterly off guard, So that was just kind of one little thing I want to throw out there. Another thing is too, just to follow up what you were saying, Greg, is go and look and study and see these things, but then ask the question: how would you do it? How would you get them? Put yourself into the mindset and perspective of the bad guy that is trying to be insidious, that is trying to do destruction and damage and destroy. Put yourself in it. Like, how would you do it? It's a very powerful. We've talked about all the time. It's like, well, how am I going to get this motherfucker? What do I like? What, and make it easy for me. To really destroy this individual or individuals. When am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? Because if you could think that way and you could put yourself and you could create that environment, it's like you're starting to connect with that understanding criminality and violence.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, really simple. We say this all the time, and it really is just echoing what Brad just said. But context determines content. Understanding that violent criminals have certain strategies or ways of attacking people. It's like when you understand, like, that's what starts to shape that context. Do you know what I mean? Like, context is far deeper than that, but that is a very important part of it. And so you have to start to, as Brad said, like, you have to study violence. You have to understand what these guys' game plans are and how do they plan to bring about your downfall. And I think, once you understand the context, like Brad said, own the problem, only then can you even start to begin talking about potential solutions. Which is why I think it was pretty obvious why you didn't get into solutions tonight, and why it makes no sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's backwards thinking. Just trying to go from solution for a problem that no one even gets or understands that it exists, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think my last analogy, the last thing I can do for people is try to just give them a parallel of this to like, let's say, for example, if you're studying ground fighting in jiu-jitsu, and one of the things that we've been focusing in on a little bit is understanding back escapes if somebody gets to reverse mount on you. So somebody takes your back and goes to apply the rear naked choke. And just very, very briefly, right? But if somebody gets on your back and they lock your hooks in, or they put you in a full body triangle and they wrap the seatbelt around you and they tuck their head in and everything else, what do you do in that moment? Either you panic, you use strength and try to just muscle your way out, or you understand the technique. And if you do, you go, what's the first and only battle that matters? And that's the hand battle. You gotta win the hand battle, because if not, you're going to get strangled. So it doesn't matter if he locks the lower body up. I'd rather him not. But it doesn't matter if he locks it up. I have to survive the hand battle first. Then I can work to win the tip battle, then I can work to win the head battle, and then I can clear and worry about the body. But if I don't survive the hand battle, well, you're going to sleep, right? So if I make the mistake of trying to clear the legs first, then I'll probably lose the hand battle because my focus isn't where it needs to be. Now, again, the context determines content. There's different situations, but generally speaking, you understand what I'm saying. But how do you know that? How do you know where to fight first? Because you understand what they're doing. And that's the parallel again. Like boxers, if you got another boxer and he's keeping his lead foot outside your foot, he's cutting the ring off on you. He's using tactics to maneuver you, to make the ring smaller on you, to move you a certain way. But if you don't know what they're doing, you have no chance of well, you have, I should say, you have a far less degree of likelihood for success. And so, again, the study of criminality, the tactical trio, the art of mass attack. And Brad, I love the analogy that, because we do say it all the time, but if you had to rob, mug, or kill someone that you just knew was way bigger and way stronger than you, how would you do it? And for a lot of people, they go, well, I'd probably use either the envelopment strategy or I would use the pincer move. Get organized, get coordinated, get someone to get him, catch him on, get him on the blind side, fucking hit him from back. It's the safest thing for me. It's the most likely to create a win-lose. I win, he loses with very little risk to me. That seems like a pretty good idea to me, especially if you go, holy fuck, this guy's big.
What you're saying is everybody loves a sucker punch.
Yeah,
essentially, because that, you know what I mean? Like, really, if you just kind of said that, if you had to attack somebody else,
yeah,
you don't want them to see it coming. Nobody does.
No,
Nobody
100%.
chooses to do it from the front, right? Like,
Yeah.
that makes no sense. So
Yeah.
why would a violent criminal do it?
Yeah.
Not if they're smart, not if they're educated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, unorganized, different story.
Well,
but-
100%. And I think, like you said, I would only add to a descriptor to your sucker punch analogy, and I would just say it's a military grade sucker punch.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's tactical maneuvers. It's not unedged, it's not unorganized. It's not like, hey, he's not looking. Thwap. It is like, oh, no, we're going to fucking catch this guy with a hammer anvil. We're going to catch this guy with envelopment, or we're going to get this guy in a pincer. You know what I mean? And it's like, if you got criminals that understand that, what's that?
I said it's far more sophisticated.
Oh, 100%.
For sure.
Yeah, if you got criminals that speak that way, yeah, it's terrifying. Like, you know what I mean? You should sleep a little uneasy tonight if you didn't know this about criminals, and go, fuck, they're that organized. They're that organized. They have that type of experience. Right?
This thing was planned weeks ago.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Like I said, we're not going to get into counter strategies, although there are counter strategies to this. But you cannot expect to own solutions when you do not understand and own the problem. So that is what tonight's episode was about. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. For everybody for listening, I appreciate you for sharing, liking, commenting. Don't forget, please, my one request off this is that wherever you are listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've hit subscribe, like, set on notifications so that anytime we release new information, you get the notification. And if you feel we're worthy of it at all, we genuinely appreciate some feedback. And again, especially when you listen to your podcast, a 5-star review. It does tremendous things for helping us to grow our audience and find more good men that are looking to weaponize and become the life-saving force in a dark, critical moment for themselves, their families, as well as other innocent people. So that is it, everybody. Stay safe, stay weaponized. Chat again soon.